Welcome back to Any Recapped. Today we will recap the saga of Tanya the Evil. Hope you enjoy the video. Make sure to comment your opinion on the series. Let's start. In the middle of a battlefield, an intense war is being fought, with one of the sides clearly winning. A group of flying mages arrives, giving air support with their rifles. Even though the losing side wants to retreat, their commander doesn't let them and wants them to continue delaying the enemy. Among the Empire's soldiers is a somewhat reluctant brown-haired girl called Visha. In the air, a small blonde-haired girl is praying to God, asking him to give her the power to destroy her enemies. When she finishes the prayer, her rifle glows with power, and she fires off an incredibly powerful explosion spell, destroying a large portion of her enemy's army. The girl's name is Tanya, and she is the commander of a platoon. Tanya and her soldiers are fighting for the Empire, a powerful military country. However, the Empire is surrounded by strong enemy countries. The soldiers on the Empire's borders are ordered to delay the enemy's attacks, while a mobile and powerful main force travels between each of these border areas to help them. As the war is going on, the Empire's military strategists realize that this plan won't work much longer. The Rhine battlefield, where Tanya and her soldiers are fighting, will have to hold out for 2 more weeks until reinforcements arrive. While they are fighting, 2 soldiers called Curse and Herald act recklessly and disobey Tanya's orders. That night at their camp, Tanya wants to send Curse and Herald back home, but they refuse to go back. Tanya gets angry but lets them stay, promising to punish them later. The next morning, Curse and Herald are transferred to the rear into a pillbox, and Visha is surprised that the 2 of them weren't punished more harshly. That night, the company's artillery observer mages come under attack by enemy mages, preventing them to continue observing the artillery attacks. Tanya decides to go and delay the enemy. She announces that rescuing the observers will be difficult since Visha is exhausted already, but Visha insists she is ready to go. The enemy mages continue to mercilessly bombard the Empire's observer mages until Tanya's platoon arrives. The platoon, consisting only of 4 mages, has to take on the much bigger enemy company. However, Tanya believes they can win. She is concerned about losing soldiers, but only because that might damage her chances of getting promoted. Deciding to destroy 3 whole enemy platoons all by herself, she separates herself from her platoon. When the enemy soldiers start shooting at her, she dodges the attacks skillfully and easily defeats most of them. Flying up above the clouds, she announces that she will destroy all enemies trespassing on the Empire's territory, but the enemy soldiers don't care. When they start shooting at her, Tanya defends herself with a magic shield. She prepares a complicated spell, says a prayer, and obliterates the rest of the enemy forces with a massive explosion. Thanks to Tanya, the Empire has managed to turn around the situation at their border. While the military strategists celebrate, one of them, a glasses-wearing man called Reincarnated, tells the others he has met Tanya before. He thinks she is a merciless monster, even though she looks like a little girl. At the military camp, Visha learns that Curse and Herald have died and that Tanya sent them to the rear as punishment, knowing they were at risk there. In modern-day Tokyo, a salaryman mercilessly fires one of his company's employees. The salaryman is cold and calculating, prepared to do anything in order to achieve a higher position in his company and lead an easy life. Surprising him while he is waiting for his train home, the man he fired earlier pushes him off the platform in the way of a moving train. Just when he's about to die, time stops and a voice starts talking to him through the people around him. The voice tells him humans have lost their faith in God and have no sense of right and wrong anymore. However, the salaryman doesn't believe in God since he thinks a God wouldn't allow tragedies to happen. Instead, he concludes the voice belongs to being X, a being similar to the devil. Because he lives in a scientific society where he has a strong social position and all his needs are met, he thinks he doesn't need a God. Dissatisfied with the salaryman's attitude, Being X decides to reincarnate him into a harsh world where he will have to fight to survive and won't be reincarnated again if he dies. The Salaryman is horrified and tries to stop him, but Being X makes time flow again. Having been hit by the train, the Salaryman reincarnates in another world as a blonde baby girl called Tanya. As the years go by, Tanya grows up as an orphan in a monastery. She lives a poor and difficult life in a war-torn city in the Empire. One day, she finds out she can use magic, which is sought after by the army. Realizing military service is a way to assure her survival, she volunteers to join the army, being only 10 years old. Arriving at the Imperial Military School, she starts her training and proves she has an exceptional talent for magic. Having never forgotten about Being X, she wants to get revenge on him by proving she doesn't need God to live an easy life in the rear echelon where it's safe. In less than a year, she becomes a military instructor. Her first recruits laugh at her for being a little girl, but she quickly establishes her supremacy using violence. On one occasion, she almost kills one of her soldiers, but Reincarnated stops her at the last moment. After graduating from school, Tanya starts her training deployment at the northern border of the country. While in her training, the Intent Alliance's army, which is the Empire's enemy, invades the Empire's territory. Tanya is forced to join the ensuing battle as an observer, supporting the army. When the Intent's army starts losing Anson, one of the commanders orders his soldiers to target Tanya, the artillery observer. Tanya is surprised when Anson's company attacks her in unison, but manages to successfully evade their bullets. She is told reinforcements are coming, but only in 10 minutes. She isn't allowed to leave the battlefield and gets ordered to continue delaying the enemy. Suddenly, her attitude changes and she realizes she has the opportunity to become a hero on the battlefield. With a wicked smile, she turns around and starts skillfully maneuvering through the air, picking off the enemy soldiers one by one. When she runs out of ammo, she clings to one of the soldiers and self-destructs her equipment, taking out 3 enemies. Having used a magic shield on herself, she stays alive and drops down onto the ground. She did all this so she can survive while leaving the impression she fought hard. Later in the hospital, Tanya is shocked when she's awarded the Silver Wings Assault Badge since she wanted to avoid being sent to the front lines and take it easy. A few days after recovering from her injuries, Tanya gets assigned to an instruction unit at the rear, exactly what she wanted. She is needed to test a new computation jewel, the kind of device that allows magic users to cast spells. The device, called Elenium Type 95, is 4 times more powerful than other computation jewels, and Tanya was chosen to test it because of her large amount of magic power. However, testing the device turns out excruciating for Tanya because it's constantly malfunctioning. The engineer who developed the jewel, a balding scientist called Adelheid, doesn't care for Tanya's safety and pushes her to her limits. Fed up with everything, Tanya sends a request for a transfer, thinking any other job would be more bearable. Her request gets approved and the Type 95 project is cancelled. Just when Tanya starts looking forward to returning to the Imperial capital, time freezes. Being X talking through a nutcracker talks to Tanya, telling her he is disappointed in her. Since she hasn't developed any faith or respect for God at all, he decides to cause a miracle and make her a believer. Before he can explain further, Tanya smashes the nutcracker and wakes up, thinking her encounter was just a dream. That morning, she gets called by Adelheid, who is overjoyed because he has had a breakthrough, Type 95. Reluctantly, Tanya tests the device again and the jewel is as unstable as ever. When Adelheid tells her he has received divine inspiration the night before, Tanya realizes being X was involved. When Type 95 threatens to explode and kill her, time suddenly stops. Being X appears and tells Tanya he has blessed her computation jewel. He tells her she has to pray to God every time she uses the jewel, thinking this will make her start believing in God. Tanya is angry at first, but shortly starts praying unconsciously. As she prays, Type 95 activates and releases an incredible amount of magic energy, allowing her to reach heights no normal mage could reach. We return back to the present after the battle on the Rhine battlefield. Tanya is frustrated, having ended up on the front lines with a cursed computational jewel. At the Imperial Strategic Headquarters, Rarigan tries convincing the other strategists that Tanya presents a danger because of her twisted personality and the fact that she is the only person who can control Type 95. However, the others don't believe him since they see Tanya as a harmless kid. At Tanya's camp, Bisha is afraid she will end up like Curse and Harold if she disobeys Tanya. However, it turns out Tanya recommended her for an officer position away from the front lines and Visha is overjoyed. Later, Tanya gets a notice that she is getting promoted to first lieutenant and gets called back to the capital to attend the military academy. She happily returns to the capital, expecting she will lead an easy life from then on. 6 months later, Tanya is enjoying her easy and peaceful life at the military academy. She is a model student who is respected by everyone because of her achievements. One day at the academy's library, Tanya meets Zetor, one of the chief strategists. Inviting Tanya to his office, he asks her what she thinks about the war. Wanting to impress him, Tanya talks about strategies and proposes the idea that other countries might unite against the Empire. Since something like that has never happened in this world, Zetor tells Tanya to write a paper about it, and he later spreads that paper to the other strategists. At a cafe, Tanya meets up with a captain called Uger. While they're talking, Umer suddenly asks Tanya why she decided to volunteer for the army. Tanya tells him she had no other choice since she is an orphan in the middle of a war. Uger tells her she should leave the army, but Tanya turns the conversation around. She tells Uger he should aim for a safe rear position since he has a wife and a child. Even though she sounds concerned for him, she actually wants to eliminate him as her competition. At the Imperial Strategic Headquarters, Zetor suggests the creation of a rapid response mage battalion. He recommends Tanya as its leader based on her achievements and the strategic knowledge she demonstrated. Sometime later, he invites Tanya for dinner and tells her about the special battalion. At that moment, Tanya realizes she has made a mistake trying to impress Zetor when they first met. Because leading a rapid response battalion is even more dangerous than fighting on the front lines, Tanya does her best to make excuses and get out of it, but Zetor manages to force her to accept. In the following days, she's trying her best to form the unit as slowly as possible, but it turns out she gets tons of applications immediately. Later, while Tanya is sorting out papers, she finds out that Visha has been chosen as her assistant. In order to sabotage her own unit, Tanya sets incredibly high standards for recruits. So she can further stall for time, she manages to convince Zetor to train the candidates for a month. Taking the candidates deep into the mountains, she begins their extremely hard training. First, she has them evade artillery bombardment for 36 hours. Immediately afterward, they have 48 hours to complete a long route on difficult mountain terrain without using any magic. Tanya hopes most of the soldiers will quit, but is unpleasantly surprised when all of them pass the training, and she manages to complete her battalion. Soon, a large military unit from the Dukedom of Dacia invades the Empire's border. Not being able to stall any longer, Tanya and her battalion are equipped with the latest computational jewels and sent to war. On the battlefield, Tanya and the others attack the Dacian forces from the air, but the Dacian army turns out to be completely helpless, having no mages of their own. Eventually, Tanya and the others reach the Dacian forces' headquarters, and Tanya orders everyone killed except the commander, who they capture. Seeing her battalion's overwhelming power, Tanya takes her troops all the way to Dacia's capital and finds a weapon factory. Before she attacks, she broadcasts a warning so she doesn't break any international laws. However, she puts on a cute voice, making the Dacians think the announcement is just a prank. Having properly warned the Dacians, Tanya orders her soldiers to fire at the factory, destroying it in a massive explosion. Satisfied with their results, the battalion returns to the Empire. Several days later, the Empire invaded Dacia and expects to occupy it soon. The Empire still has two enemies, the Republic and the Entente Alliance. The Empire's strategists intend to defeat the Entente Alliance first, since it's the weaker of the two. Rudersdorf, a stern-looking mustached staff officer, proposes they make use of Tanya's battalion again. Talking privately to Visha, Tanya thinks the Empire should be capable of defeating the Entente Alliance and that the war should have been over already. She thinks one of the other countries is supporting Entente, and that even being X might be supporting someone there. It turns out the Entente Alliance has allied itself with both the Republic and another country called the Allied Kingdom. In the north, the Empire's forces fight, but Entente turns out a lot tougher than expected, having been supported by their new allies. With their bomber planes, they easily mow down most of the Empire's mages. Suddenly, Tanya's battalion arrives as reinforcements. While her soldiers fight the enemy mages, Tanya engages the bomber planes all by herself. Thanks to her superior speed, the planes can't hit her, while she boards them and drops grenades into their cockpits. While the pilots are panicking, Tanya calmly says a prayer and takes out several of them in one go, while the remaining planes retreat in a panic. Suddenly, time stops and being X talks through one of the pilots' corpses. He mocks Tanya, saying she has to fight against the entire world now. Before he can say anything else, Tanya shoots the corpse and time starts flowing again. Later, Tanya meets up with Rudersdorf and Rarigen, who orders her to advance to the front lines and take out an enemy fortress. She acts brave, but is worried about being X's words, not wanting to fight a world war. Sometime later, Anson separates from his daughter Mary and his wife, who is forced to leave the country because of the war. Before they part, Mary gives Anson a submachine gun with his initials on it. At the northern base, Tanya proposes they should pull back and save resources in order to prepare for an offensive in spring. However, the strategists want to end the war as quickly as possible, thinking they have enough resources. She still thinks this will cause unnecessary losses, but Heinrich, the gray-haired strategic commander of the northern battlefield, gets violent and starts yelling at her. Later, Tanya talks to Rudersdorf and Rarigen, who asks her what she really thinks. While talking about the war, Tanya figures out the real goal of the offensive are distracting the Entente Alliance at one front, while surprising them by attacking from the sea. Rarigen and Rudersdorf are surprised since this is a plan only a few officers know about. Realizing how capable Tanya is, Rudersdorf decides to send her battalion to destroy the fortress at Orstfjord, the place where they intend to launch the surprise attack. Soon, Tanya and her battalion begin their surprise attack on the fort, and it turns out Anson is stationed there. While Tanya's soldiers are destroying patrol ships and the fortress cannons, Anson and his comrades hear them and move out. Anson, together with a battalion of mages, arrives and part of Tanya's battalion engages them, while the rest continue destroying the cannons. In a fierce battle, all of Anson's soldiers are defeated. Suddenly, Anson sees Tanya and charges at her in a fit of rage, remembering his previous encounter with her. Meanwhile, the rest of Tanya's battalion manages to destroy all the cannons just in time for the Empire's ships to arrive. Before the enemy can react, they are all wiped out by the ships and Tanya's battalion starts retreating, having finished their job. However, Anson doesn't give up and continues his charge toward Tanya. While he is shooting at her maniacally, Tanya pierces him with her bayonet and kills him, taking his rifle with her. In spraying the Unified States, a country far away from the war, Anson's daughter, Mary, hears that the Empire has occupied the Intent Alliance's capital. Sometime later, Tanya and her battalion return to the Rhine battlefield in order to fight against the Republic. Tanya soon gets a report that Rhine City, one of the Republic's cities that the Empire has occupied, has started a rebellion. Together with a number of the Republic's mages, the city's people have formed a militia and cut off the Empire's supply lines. The next day, Tanya is ordered to go to Rhine City, eliminate the enemy mages, and recapture the city. The Empire announces that civilians need to evacuate and everyone left in the city after the evacuation will be treated as an enemy. Arriving at Rhine City, Tanya's soldiers are concerned about not being able to tell between civilians and the rebels but have no choice but to fight. Entering the city, Tanya and her battalion are ambushed by the rebels. Quickly, the enemy mages show themselves, fighting while maneuvering around buildings. One of Tanya's soldiers, a black-haired man called Weiss, gets wounded and Tanya has him leave the battle. In the air, Tanya's soldiers continue fighting the enemy mages and force them to retreat into a building. Seeing this, Tanya calls off the assault and announces to the rebels that they will open fire on them if they don't release the Imperial soldiers they captured. When one of the captured Imperial soldiers manages to run away and gets shot by the rebels, Visha records it on her jewel and sends the video to their higher-ups. Receiving the video footage, the higher-ups order the army to wipe out all the rebels. As soon as the order is given, the Imperial army starts mercilessly bombarding the rebels, destroying the city in the process. Seeing this, the Republic's mages are outraged and start saving the civilians. Tanya gets the report that they are preventing the Empire's soldiers from firing their artillery and gets the order to fire at them. Tanya wants to follow the orders, but one of her soldiers, a blonde man called Grants, asks her to reconsider since some of the civilians could die. However, Tanya tells him that the enemies they let go of might become new soldiers who will attack the Empire in the future. Grants is horrified by her logic, but Tanya beats him, telling him he has to listen to his superiors. Desperate, Grants takes his gun and madly starts attacking the enemy mages. Having survived his stab wound, Anson wakes up in a hospital in the Allied Kingdom. After being unconscious for months, he says he saw God's light and that God told him to destroy Tanya. A few days after the battle in Rhine City, Tanya meets Udra again, who has been promoted to major. He reveals to her that the army plans to pull back from the Rhine battlefront, draw the enemy's main unit in, and destroy them. They want to end the war with the Republic as soon as possible. He also tells her that her unit will be asked to serve as the rear guard in the operation, so the enemy doesn't learn about the retreat. At the Imperial Strategic Headquarters, Zephyr wants to end the war by eliminating as many enemy soldiers as possible and making them unable to continue fighting. Sometime later, Tanya and her battalion start fighting at the Rhine battlefront but are losing since the enemy's army is overwhelmingly large. However, Tanya doesn't want to retreat and allows the enemy to find out of the Empire's false retreat. After successfully completing their mission, Tanya's soldiers are taken care of at the hospital. Visha consoles Grants about what happened in Rhine City. She thinks that Tanya probably just wanted to tell him that her soldiers' actions are her responsibility and that they only need to listen to her orders. At the Empire's strategic headquarters, Rudrujan congratulates Tanya on her victory. He immediately gives her new orders, presenting her with a plan to take over the enemy's headquarters. Suddenly, Adelheid storms into the room and takes her to a military base. He presents her with a new series of incredibly fast flying machines called V1. Tanya and her soldiers will use these machines to break through the Republic's territory and reach his headquarters. However, they only fly straight forward and Tanya is worried for her safety. Convinced the Empire's army has withdrawn, the Republic sends its main force forward, convinced they can defeat the Empire. The night before Tanya's mission, Zedor and Rudersdorf eat dinner, talking about the war. If they succeed, they will end the war, but if they fail, all their other plans will fail too. The next morning, Tanya and her soldiers board the V1 rockets and are launched toward the Republic's headquarters successfully. Tanya regrets how things turned out since she was always planning to stay at the rear and take it easy. However, she refuses to die and swears to get revenge on being X. Reaching their destination, Tanya and the others drop down onto enemy territory. Having landed in a forest, Tanya divides her troops into 3 squads and orders each of them to secretly infiltrate 3 different targets. Tanya's squad successfully infiltrates their target facility but finds that it's abandoned. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Army High Council, the Empire's politicians are angry because the strategists ordered the army to pull away, putting the Empire's stability at risk. At that moment, an officer reports that Tanya and her soldiers have destroyed the enemy's headquarters. One of Tanya's squads has destroyed the enemy's communication headquarters, while the second has destroyed the enemy's ammo depot. Having completed their mission, Tanya's troops regroup and retreat in a submarine. The Republic's army continues advancing toward the Empire, but still doesn't see any of the Empire's troops. Under the ground, the Empire's soldiers have been preparing mines under enemy encampments. As they activate the mines and destroy a huge number of encampments, the Empire's troops arrive with heavily armored soldiers and tanks. While the panicking Republican main force is getting surrounded, they can't communicate with headquarters since their communications have been sabotaged. Meanwhile, Tanya and her battalion are traveling in a submarine. Tanya gives a report about the Empire's latest successes and feels proud of her soldiers. Reaching their destination, Tanya and her soldiers join the assault on the Republican army. Their mission is to eliminate any enemy forces trying to retreat. Tanya is optimistic, hoping this war will end soon and she can start a comfortable life in peace. Everything seems to be going according to plan until a battalion of the Allied Kingdom's enemy mages appears near Tanya and starts attacking. Leading them is Anson, now wearing an eye patch. Outnumbered, Tanya and her soldiers disperse and do their best to pick off the enemy soldiers, but a lot of them are hit and fall into the water. Tanya and the others hide behind clouds and ambush their enemies, defeating most of them. Approaching Tanya, Anson shoots at her with an incredibly powerful gun, but Tanya manages to evade. Fighting one-on-one against Anson and using Type 95, Tanya manages to knock his rifle out of his hands and stab him in the chest. Unexpectedly, Anson grabs her arm and grins, showing that he is being controlled by being X. While he is getting ready to self-destruct and take Tanya with him, Visha appears at the last second and shoots him. Free from Anson's grasp, Tanya shoots him repeatedly with her rifle, but he grins again and self-destructs in a huge explosion. Seeing Anson has been defeated, his troops retreat. While all that was happening, the Imperial soldiers defeated the Republic's army completely and are now celebrating their victory. Having used her magic shield, Tanya survived the explosion and her soldiers who fell into the ocean were rescued. 15 days later, the Empire occupies the Republican capital, Paris. Even though everyone is celebrating, Tanya feels that something is off. When Visha tells her that the Republican Navy is withdrawing to their military base, she realizes they may actually be planning a new attack and that the war isn't over. She tries convincing her higher-ups to attack the port, but nobody believes her, so she decides to launch an attack under her own authority. However, before she can do anything, the strategic headquarters cancels her mission. Frustrated, Tanya throws her medal to the ground in despair, regretting the fact that they had the chance to stop the war, but they didn't listen. Later, Tanya asks to speak to any of the chief strategists, but both Zedor and Rudersdorf are still celebrating their victory. However, Revergen sees her and agrees to hear her out. When Tanya tells him the chief strategists are naive and are celebrating too early, Revergen thinks she is arrogant. Tanya tells him that even though it would be logical that the war is over, humans aren't always logical. She thinks humans are often irrational beasts and that if they want to achieve true peace, they have to eliminate every single potential enemy. At that moment, an officer comes in reporting that remnants of the Republican army are becoming active on the southern continent. At a military port on the southern continent, the Republican army established a country called the Free Republic. They have declared that they intend to fight the Empire until the end and are gathering the survivors from the Allied Kingdom and intend alliance. At the Imperial capital, Tanya's soldiers are preparing for war once again. At the strategic headquarters, the chief strategists realize their mistake was failing to defeat all of the enemy's forces. Since they need a small expedition into the southern continent, they decide to use Tanya's battalion again. Several days later, Tanya's battalion is traveling towards the southern continent. While Tanya is lamenting the Empire's foolishness, the world's countries are preparing for war. In the Unified States, Mary Anson's daughter volunteers to join the army and create a world where no one else has to lose their family members. Having arrived at the southern continent, Tanya holds a speech telling her troops they have no need for a god and that they will take over his work. Thank you so much for staying till the end. Make sure to subscribe for more similar recaps. You've been fantastic. Bye.